Friends, in the last two classes, we read the chapter number 4, The Enemy, and today also we are going to continue with the same chapter. This is page number 31 that is shown on your screens, and this is maybe the middle of the page. And we read till the last class that Yumi was really showing her stubbornness. She was determined, she was obstinate, she was not ready to help either Sadao or Hana. She refused that she is not going to go into his room, American's room, and she is not going to wash his wounds at all. She really disliked to touch the body or to look at the American. And now at last Hana actually asked her to go out of the room because she refused to do anything for Hana. And at last, Hana was there alone in the room. Hana was alone, and we know that we already have learned from the chapter that Hana really disliked to be alone with the man, with that American in the room. She disliked this idea because these Japanese people, they actually dislike all the Americans. Now what actually happens? At at once Yumi left the room, means because Yumi was asked by Hana that she should return to her work, and she went away. But this left Hana with the white man alone, and she might have been too afraid to stay had not her anger, this is very important, had not her anger at Yumi's stubbornness now sustained her. What is the meaning of this line actually? That because Hana was in a confusion, she was not being helped by the servants, and now she was, you can say, alone in the room, but she disliked the idea of being alone with that American. She wanted to go out, but she stayed there. Why? Because she actually wanted to show the servants that she could do all these things herself, and because because of all the you can say refusals which were given by the which were proved by the servants, now she also became stubborn and she sustained herself. Sustained here means she supported herself because her anger was much more than her, you can say, dislike for the American. That is why she stayed there. The next paragraph. Stupid Yumi, she muttered fiercely, means Hana said it. Muttering here means she said it in a low voice, and she said fiercely means very angrily. She said it angrily but in a low voice. She said, stupid Yumi, is this anything but a man, and a wounded helpless man? Means we are not doing anything, we actually are helping a man, and he is a wounded helpless man. Maybe he was an American, but before that all these people, they were human beings, and he was also a human being. And according to Hana, they should keep all their discrimination and all their dislikes aside for some time, because their first and foremost duty is to save the life of a man. In the conviction of her own superiority, she bent impulsively and untied the knotted rugs that kept the white man covered. Means at last Hana had actually made up her mind, and she was trying to open the knotted rugs. Knotted here means because knots were, you can say, there on his clothes, and she started opening the you can say opening the rugs here means the worn and torn clothes were now being thrown away by, means she wanted that she should herself you can say wash the wounds of the man. When she had his breast bare, she dipped the man small clean towel that Yumi had brought into the steaming hot water and washed his face carefully. And after that, she actually dipped a small towel into hot water and started cleaning and washing the face of the white man. The man's skin, though rough with exposure, was of a fine texture, and she noticed that the man, this young man, this American, was having a very beautiful skin, and he had his skin was of a very fine texture, means structure, and must have been very blonde when he was a child, means he would have been, this boy, this young man would have been a very beautiful boy, a very smart boy when he was a child. He would have a very fair and light golden colored skin. He thought this. Next paragraph and the next page also. This is page number 32. While she was thinking these thoughts, though not really liking the man better now that he was no longer a child, she kept on washing him until his upper body was quite clean. What is the meaning? While she was thinking these thoughts, means she was just thinking about the man, about his childhood, that this boy would have been a very, you can say, golden colored kind of boy. He would have been very blonde when he was a child, though not really liking the man better now. Means though she did not like the Americans at all, and also she had a disliking for this American, that he was no longer a child. She kept on washing him. She started washing the body, or maybe face, or the upper body, just over waist. She started washing his body until his upper body was quite clean, but she dared not turn him over. But now she wanted to clean his back also, but she did not have that, you can say, power, or maybe she hesitated to turn him over. Where was Sadao? Now she dared not turn him over. Where was Sadao? Now her anger was ebbing. Means she actually wanted Dr. Sadao's, her husband's, help, and she was looking for him, and her anger was actually increasing, and she was anxious again, and she rose, wiping her hands on the wrong towel. Means she actually wiped her hands and wanted to look for Sadao, because she wanted his help, and she was angry also. Then, lest the man be chilled, she put the quilt over him, and she actually put the towel on him only, or maybe that quilt also, and she went out of the room. Sadao, she called softly. She was looking for Sadao, for her husband. He had been about to come in when she called. Means when she started calling her husband, and she opened the door maybe, and Dr. Sadao was already there. He was just going to come into the room. His hand had been on the door, and now he opened it. She saw that he had brought his surgeon's emergency bag, and that he wore his surgeon's coat. And now she noticed that the man, means her husband, was coming dressed up in his official dress, means in surgeon's emergency bag was there, and he had his surgeon's coat also. Means he had come with, you can say, a mindset that he was going to operate the man. You have decided to operate? She cried. Yes, he said shortly. He turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilized towel. Sterilized means maybe made free from germs by boiling. So he had taken the sterilized towel upon the floor of the tokonoma. Tokonoma is actually a Japanese word, and tokonoma generally means a niche, Niche. This is written in your books also at the bottom of the page. Niche, Niche, or an alcove in a Japanese home for displaying a flower arrangement. Means it is a kind of, you can say, corner which would be there in everybody's house also. Just at the corner of a room, you would have a piece of wood, or maybe cemented floor kind of thing, a little bit, where you can put your, you can say, vases, or some kind of ornaments, or something like that. Now what actually happened? Fetch towels, he said. And now when he entered the room, he was having a towel in his hand, and he unfolded some of the things, and he asked Hannah to bring. What is the meaning of fetch here? Fetch means to bring. Bring some towel. He asked her to bring some towel. She went obediently, but now, how anxious now, to the linen shelves and look out the towels. What is the meaning? She went obediently. This is a very important point actually. Hannah, as a wife, she is very obedient. She is going to do everything for the sake of her husband. Whatever her husband would ask her to do, she was ready. She was always supporting. She is a supportive wife actually. But how anxious now to the linen shelves and look out the towels. There ought also to be old pieces of matting so that the blood would not ruin the fine floor covering. But when she was going out, she actually had a lot of consideration. What? She was worried that if the man would be operated on that beautiful mat, then her mats of those of that room, they will get dirty, they will get ruined and spoiled. So she actually wanted to save the mat of the room. She went out to the back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights, and took an armful of them. Now, what she had done, she went in, you can say, out of the room, and she went back into the back veranda. Why? Because she knew that the gardener generally had some small pieces of mats. Those were, you can say, not of any use, but they generally were put on the plants just to save them from the cold weather in winter season. So she actually wanted to take all those mats or all those pieces of mats from the back of the veranda, and she wanted to save her beautiful matting of the room. But when she went back into the room, she saw this was useless. Why? Because when she went with these small pieces of mat inside the room, she noticed that the matting was already full of blood, means it had a lot of blood spots on it, and it was already spoiled and ruined. The blood had already soaked through the packing in the man's wound and had ruined the mat under him. Means it had already ruined it. Ruined means spoiled. Oh, the mat, she cried. Means she was really upset to see that the mat was ruined, mat was full of blood. Yes, it is ruined, Dr. Sadao replied, as though he did not care. Means Dr. Sadao did not care what was happening to the mat. He was trying to help the man, he was trying to save a life. Help me to turn him, he commanded her. And at last, she was given a command by the husband that they had to turn him over. She obeyed him without a word. Again, very important line. She was obeying her husband without saying a single word, because she was a very supportive wife and always wanted to help her husband in any situation without speaking a word. And he began to wash the man's back carefully. Yumi would not wash him, she said. She actually told this fact to Dr. Sadao, that she asked Yumi to clean his wounds, but she refused. The maid servant refused. Did you wash him then? Dr. Sadao asked. Then who had washed his face and the upper body, the front body? Not stopping for a moment with his swift, concise movements. Means he was doing a lot of things, and in between he was talking to Hannah also. Yes, she said. Means she said that yes, she was the one who had cleaned the wounds, or who had cleaned his body, upper body. He did not seem to hear her, but Dr. Sadao was such a dedicated and sensible doctor that he was not listening to what was said by Hannah, and he was really busy with his work. But she was used to his absorption. She knew that her husband was such a doctor who would get absorbed. Absorption means he would really indulge. वो खो जाता है अपने काम में when he was at work. And she wondered for a, this is page number 33. She wondered for a moment if it mattered to him what was the body upon which he worked so long, as it was for the work he did so excellently. Means, what is the meaning? She wondered for a moment, means she was thinking if it mattered to him what was the body upon which he worked so long, as it was for the work he did so excellently. Means she was just thinking that does it matter for Dr. Sadao whom he was operating upon, whether he was a Japanese or an American or somebody else? She was just thinking about this. You will have to give the anesthetic if he needs it, he said. And Dr. Sadao asked Hana that she would have to nurse him, she would have to support the doctor at that time, and maybe if it was required, then she would have to give the anesthesia to the man. She would have to give the anesthetic. उसको बेहोशी की दवा कौन देगा? Hana, if required. And this was said by Dr. Sadao. I, she repeated blankly. I and a question mark. Means she was just asking. I. Why? Because she was quite afraid. She did not have done it before. She never had given an anesthetic to anybody before. But never have I, she said. It is easy enough. But Dr. Sadao said it was an easy task and she could do it very easily. He said impatiently. He was taking out the packing now. Packing here means the things which were put on the spot, the wounds, just to stop the bleeding. And now he was taking out the cotton or whatever, or moss or whatever was there on his wounds to stop the bleeding. And the blood began to flow more quickly. And when he opened the packing, a lot of blood started flowing out of the body. He peered into the wound with the bright surgeon's light fastened on his forehead. And what is the meaning? He peered. What is the meaning of peer? Peer means jhankna, to look inside. So he peered into the wound means he looked inside the wound with the bright surgeon's light. There was a bright surgeon's light just on his head. You can see it here. Here, it is here. So with this, you can say light that is fastened, that is actually attached with his forehead. He started looking into the wound of the man. The bullet is still there, and he noticed that the bullet was still inside the body. He said with cool interest, now I wonder how deep this rock wound is. If it is not too deep, it may be that I can get the bullet. But the bleeding is not superficial. He had lost much blood. What is the meaning of superficial? Superficial means just only on the surface. So he noticed, Dr. Sadao said that it would be very hard task for him if the rock wound would be deep. Because if the rocks would have given some wounds which were really deep, then the operation could not be successful. It is not easy to take the bullet out. But if the wounds are superficial, if the wounds are only on the skin, on the surface, then it would be quite easy for him to take the bullet out. And according to Dr. Sadao, maybe the wounds were deep. They were not superficial. At this moment, Hana choked. This is very important word. We have done it in deep water also, where Douglas was choking hard. Choking means suffocating. उसका दम घुट रहा है. So at this moment, Hana choked. She felt suffocated. SUFFOCATED. Write the meaning whenever it is told to you while these classes. You need to have a pencil, HB pencil, and try to write all these meanings on your books. At this moment, Hana choked. He looked upon and saw her face the color of sulfur. Now, why the color of sulfur? Because color of sulfur is pale, yellowish, dull. So he noticed that Hana was choking hard. She was not able to breathe. She was suffocating. Uska dam ghut raha hai. Because she had never seen an operation going on in front of her eyes. And he looked up and saw her face the color of sulfur. He noticed that she was just going to faint, maybe, because she had a very dull face. She looked bloodless. And he got afraid. Who? Dr. Sadao was afraid for Hana. Don't faint, he said sharply. He said, okay, don't faint now, because he noticed that she was really nervous and maybe choking hard. He did not put down his exploring instrument, but he could not do anything. He was the husband of Hana, but he was a doctor and he was operating on a dying man at that time. He could not help Hana, and he continued with his operation. He could not stop all these things. If I stop now, and he said this to Hana, he said, if I stop now, the man will surely die. And for him, the most important thing at that time was to save his life. She clapped her hands to her mouth, and means she put her hands on the mouth and she leaped up. Leaped up means jumped up. She actually jumped up and ran out of the room. Outside में because उसको उल्टी आ रही है, because she was just going to retch, or maybe she actually clapped her hands, she put her hands on the mouth because she felt like vomiting and ran out of the room. Outside in the garden, he heard her retching. What is the meaning of retching? Retching means vomiting. And then he noticed that she was actually making some sounds of vomiting. It means that she is going to vomit and she would come back. But he went on with his work. But as a husband, his basic instinct was asking him to go out and help the wife, help Hana. But because he was operating on a dying man at that time, he could not leave him at any cost. It will be better for her to empty the stomach. And he said this to himself. He said that this is good for Hana to empty her stomach. जब पेट खाली हो जाएगा, it would be better for her. He thought. He had forgotten that, of course, she had never seen an operation, but her distress and his inability to go to her at once made him impatient. But because he was not able to go out and help his wife, just because of this patient, that is why he became really impatient and angry and upset and irritable also with this man. He really had anger to show to this man who lay like dead, like under his knife, who was just almost dead under his knife, but he could not say anything to this man, and he was really angry. This is page number 34. This man, he thought, there is no reason under heaven why he should live. And this is a very important, you can say, paragraph and a comment given by Dr. Sadao. This man, there is no reason under heaven why he should live. Means Dr. Sadao was not able to understand that why this man was still alive, even though he had a bullet in his body, even though he was maybe brutally tortured by the Japanese army, maybe he was thrown out of the waves of the sea and he was thrown on the spiky and spiny rocks, sharp rocks. But still, even after having so many wounds in his body, he was still alive. And Dr. Sadao was asking how this was possible. And maybe he actually wanted to ask the God that please, this man should not be saved because his life was actually a kind of trouble and it is going to make their life risky. अगर वो जिंदा रहता है तो Hana and Dr. Sadao and the children, they would be in trouble actually, because they were helping an enemy soldier. He was not a Japanese, he was an American. Unconsciously, this thought made him ruthless. What is the meaning of ruthless? Ruthless means careless. Now, because he was thinking like this, he became very angry and very carelessly he started doing a lot of things and he proceeded swiftly. Swiftly means very quickly he was doing the operation. In his dream, the man moaned with, but Sadao paid no heed except to mutter at him. Means when he was doing the operation, the man, this American, he actually was unconscious, abhi bhi behosh hai, but still he was moaning. Moaning here means he was crying with pain. He was moaning, crying, and then Dr. Sadao paid no heed. He was not paying any attention to the cries which were made by the patient, and he muttered. Dr. Sadao muttered here means he said this to himself in a low voice. Mutter means to speak in a low voice. He said, groan, groan if you like. I am not doing this for my own pleasure. In fact, I do not know why I am doing this. Again, a very important comment. Dr. Sadao said, groan means cry, shout. I don't want to, it doesn't matter for him, for me. And he actually wanted to tell this fact to the patient that he doesn't matter for him. And Dr. Sadao was asking himself that why he was trying to save his life. He did not know. He was totally confused. And he said that he was not doing anything for his own pleasure. He was trying to save his own life, to save the life of the man. The door opened and there was Hannah again. And at last, the door opened and Hannah came back after retching, after vomiting. Where is the anesthetic? She asked in a clear voice, but she was confident now and did not hesitate. And she came inside the room and she wanted to ask, where is the anesthetic? Where was the anesthetic? She asked this from Dr. Sadao. Sadao motioned with his chin. Motioned with his chin means he gave a signal with his chin. फेस से उसने एक इशारा सा किया. It is as well that you came back, he said. This fellow is beginning to stir. What is the meaning of beginning to stir? He said that it was really fine. He was really happy to see Hannah back because because the patient, that American, he was just about to move. He started moving. It means he was coming out of the consciousness. And just to make him unconscious again, they needed to give him anesthetic or anesthesia. She had the bottle and gave some cotton in her hand. But how shall I do it? But Hannah did not know how to give anesthetic. She asked it from Dr. Sadao. Dr. Sadao said, simply saturate. Saturate means just dip. Just dip the cotton and hold it near his nostrils. Just dip this cotton into the bottle of anesthetic and put that cotton near his nostrils, near his nose. Sadao replied without delaying for one moment. The intricate detail of his work. When he breathes badly, move it away a little. And he also said that when you would put that cotton near his nostrils, just put it away when he would be started moving badly. Because she couldn't do it, you can say, more than enough, because he could die also. More anesthesia is dangerous. She crouched close to the sleeping face. Crouched means she actually went near, or maybe bent. वो झुक गई to the sleeping face of the young American. It was a piteously thin face. Piteously means it was really badly thin face. Why thin? Because he was really weak. Because he was tortured. Because he was kept hungry. And he was not given anything to eat for last many days. And now he was brutally wounded also. And the lips were twisted. The man was suffering whether he knew it or not. They knew that the man, this American, was suffering through a lot of pain, because whether he was, you can say, in consciousness or unconscious, but they knew it, that he was actually suffering a lot of pain. Watching him, she wondered if the stories they heard sometimes of the sufferings of prisoners were true. Now she started thinking that so many newspapers, so many bulletins were coming, and so from different sources they came to know that Japanese army was actually very brutal, or maybe they were very cruel towards the prisoner of war. And maybe all these stories were correct, because this is a true, you can say, evidence of it. Because this man was suffering a lot. This man was tortured by Japanese army maybe. And all those stories were true, according to Hannah. They came like flickers of rumor, told by word of mouth and always contradicted. Means all these rumors that Japanese army was, you can say, cruel and brutal. They actually torture their POWs, or prisoner of wars. All these things were coming in the market, and then the army was always contradicting. Army refused that all these things does not or did not happen. In the newspapers, the reports were always that whatever the Japanese armies went Wherever the Japanese armies went, the people received them gladly. But in the newspapers, sometimes these kind of reports were publishing that wherever the Japanese army was going, they were being welcomed by the people with cries of joy at their liberation. But sometimes she remembered such men as General Takima. But she had some examples like General Takima also. General Takima, who at home beat his wife cruelly. Though no one mentioned it now that he had fought so victorious a battle in Manchuria, because he was a very important general, because he was a very successful general of Japan, nobody had mentioned anywhere that he always beat his wife cruelly. He was a very cruel husband and he was indulged in domestic violence. But because he was victorious and he had a victory in battle in Manchuria, so all these things were hidden. If a man like that could be so cruel, if General Takima was such a cruel man to a woman in his power, would he not be cruel to one like this, for instance? So how, if they could treat these women in their house cruelly, brutally, inhumanly, so how they would be torturing the prisoners of war? You can imagine this. So she was just thinking about all these things. She hoped anxiously that this young man had not been tortured, and she was hoping that this man should not be tortured anymore. It was at this moment that she observed deep red scars on his neck, and then she noticed that there were some scars. What is the meaning of scar? Scar means some wound or marks of wounds. So वहाँ पर जख्म के कुछ निशान थे on his neck and just under the ear. And now these were the evidences which proved that this man, this American, was also tortured by the Japanese army. And she asked from Dr. Sadao. She said, "Those scars," she murmured in a low voice, she said, lifting her eyes to Sadao. But he did not answer. But Dr. Sadao was not interested in listening to what was said by Hana, because he was busy with his work, because he was operating on the man. At this moment, he felt the tip of his instrument strike against something hard, and at last, Dr. Sadao put his instrument inside the body of the American, and the instrument actually touched something hard inside the body. This is page number 35. Just near his kidney, he touched it. All thought left him. He felt only the purest pleasure. Means he was such a surgeon who really liked to go through these kind of dangerous situations. He wanted to be successful in doing these kind of, you can say, worst situations. He wanted to handle these kind of critical operations, and he was getting pleasure out of it. वो बहुत खुश हो रहा है when he was trying to get the bullet out, because he was a professional in this. He probed with his fingers. Probed means he checked. He checked with his fingers delicately, familiar with every atom of this human body. And he was such a master, he was such a genius of surgery that he knew where he is going to find which atom, every particle of the body. He knew about it. He was familiar. His old American professor of anatomy had seen to that knowledge. Means when he had gone to America, the professor was always telling them, ignorance of the human body is the surgeon's critical or cardinal sin, sirs. This is very important. This was taught to Dr. Sadao in America by their professor, that if you are ignorant, if you don't know anything about any part of your body, of human body, then this is actually a sin for a doctor. For a doctor, the best thing is to know everything about each and every part of the body. And if a doctor is ignorant about some parts, then it is not a fault, it is a sin. ये एक गलती नहीं, ये एक पाप है, according to that professor. He had thundered at his classes year after year. To operate without as complete knowledge of the body as if you had made it, anything less than that is murder. Means if you do an operation on a patient without knowing some of the parts of the body, some, if you lack some knowledge about the anatomy, about the body, and anything wrong happens to the patient, it is nothing less than a murder, according to that professor. If you are not able to save a life just because of lack of knowledge, then it is, or it can be, or it would be called as a murder. It is not quite at the kidney, my friend, and this is very important. Dr. Sadao was always calling his patients my friend. So, even though this man was not their friend, this man who was laying in front of them, he was their enemy. He was an American, but still, Dr. Sadao was calling him his friend. He said, "It is not quite at the kidney, my friend," Sadao murmured. It was his habit to murmur to the patient. It was, means Dr. Sadao was always in a habit of talking to the patients when he forgot himself in an operation, when he was indulged, when he was absorbed in his work. He started talking to the patients generally, and he called them my friend. He always called his patients my friend, and so now he did, forgetting that this was his enemy. Then quickly, with the cleanest and most precise of incisions. What is the meaning of incision? Cutting. He started cutting the skin, cutting the body. The bullet was out, and at last, Dr. Sadao, with his cleanest of the hands, with his smartest, or you can say very good fingers, with his hands, which were really, you can say, skilled, and he tried to get the bullet out, and he incisioned the body, and the bullet was at last out. He was able to put the bullet out of the body. The man quivered. What is the meaning of quivering? Quivered means he started, you can say, trembling and shaking with his this actually made him quiver, but he was still unconscious. Nevertheless, means in spite of all this, he muttered a few English words. So today we are going to stop here only, and tomorrow in the next class, in the next session, we are going to continue from the same page number 35. Till then, stay safe, keep looking these videos, and at the same time try to learn a lot during this lockdown. Thank you very much. Goodbye.